morning to all of you Miamians. I'm Mollie Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. And this morning, as part of the Alumni Association's webinar series and in coordination with the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum, today we present African Textiles, Fashion, and Issues of Cultural Appropriation. Joining us today are Jordan Fenton, Associate Professor of Art History here at Miami, and Elaine Yuen, a doctoral candidate in cultural heritage at Kent State University. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here this morning. Just wanted to give a quick reminder to our viewers that you can ask questions live during the webinar. You just need to click that Ask a Question button under your video. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan and Elaine to tell us a little bit about themselves and to get us started. So welcome.
Thank you, Mollie. Thank you very much for organizing this. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Dr. Jordan Fenton. I am with the art history program here at Miami, and my research is in African art history, and I have been going to Africa since 2008 and continually going back and doing field research in the country of Nigeria, West Africa, where I look at masquerades, textiles, dress, fashion, and secret societies and their art forms.
And the Arts Museum having me for this webinar. My name is Elaine Yuen. I'm a doctoral candidate currently at Kent State University. I'm also a visiting assistant professor at the Miami University in the fashion program. My research focusing on cultural appropriation, and this is also my dissertation focus. And as an Asian race, I also focus on Chinese and Japanese culture. My research focus on using the university museum artifacts to support fashion students' learning physically and virtually. Thank you again for having me today.
So I will be the first speaker, and my job is to contextualize this wonderful exhibition and introduce African textiles before handing it off to discussions of cultural appropriation and connections and issues related to that discussion. So first of all, I want to thank everyone. Although I don't see you, I know you're there. Thank you for coming and joining us. And yes, so this webinar is in connection with the very wonderful program here that we have at Miami. One of our areas of excellence in the Department of Art, in the College of Creative Arts, in the art history program, is our senior capstone exhibition. And here you're looking at screenshots of the actual exhibition. So before I go any further, please make sure, if you are on campus or in this region of the world, in Southwest Ohio, make sure that you go to this exhibition, number one, and really see the brilliance, the excellence that the students have put together and curated for you. And so the topic was African textiles. And that was a topic that was easy to come up with. Why? Because most folks might not be aware of, but the Richard and Carole Cox Museum of Art has around 500 works from Africa, Oceania, and Native America. The collection is huge, and their collection in particular of African textiles is really astonishing. And so the idea that I had, as well as with museum staff, was to highlight the textiles. And so this is the basic sort of premise of this exhibition. And before I go more into the specifics of this wonderful sort of student professionally curated exhibition, allow me to just give you a few screenshots of what this wonderful curated space looks like. And here we have examples from all across the continent. And Africa is truly one of the most diverse continents in the world. And what we have here are pieces from North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, and Central Africa on display. And the theme that organizes all of these wonderful examples is the global nature of African textiles and the ways in which they are plugged into the global marketplace. So money and economics and trade and commerce are very much a part of this wonderful exhibition. And those ideas help to tell the stories of these wonderful pieces on exhibit, and some of which I'll be talking about as we move forward here. But real quick, just to throw out the idea, when we start to think of what are some of the most important artistic genres across the African continent, because this place in the world is so diverse, that's a very hard question to answer. However, one could easily argue that textiles are one of the most ubiquitous art forms, artistic genres found across the entire continent. And so one could easily then say that African textiles are one of the most important artistic genres on this continent, and we are here then to celebrate that. So as I move forward, here is a wonderful image of all the student curators. And really what you're looking at, or what you were looking at, were snapshots of the final outcome of a year-long a capstone a program, where in the fall semester we have a seminar that delves into the topic at hand, led by myself. And then during that seminar, there's a crash course in textiles, in African art, in how to curate and how to work with objects. And then throughout that semester, 16 weeks, that exhibition comes to life, and then it is installed in the spring semester, which you're able to go and see. So first and foremost, so many people need to be thanked. The wonderful staff, the wonderful folks at the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum, in particular, Jason Shaman, the curator of exhibitions. He is a wonderful partner and wonderful addition to this program, where he is the professional curator, where students and myself lean on throughout the program to realize this wonderful exhibition. And so in art history, every year we rotate the capstone among the 4 art historians here at Miami. And each time it rotates, the theme then changes to connect to the area of expertise and specialization of the art historian faculty leader. And of course, for myself, that would have been African art, and hence the focus on African textiles. So again, this is a truly distinctive program where we do not know of another equivalent in an undergraduate art history degree, where students as seniors come together and professionally curate an exhibition and are the curators at a professional art museum. So it's a tremendously wonderful, practical engagement with all of their knowledge that they have acquired at Miami, and of course with their art history degree. All right, so I will now move forward and start to address African textiles and sort of further contextualize things. I have 20 minutes to do this, so I'm watching my time to make sure that I stay very close to it. So when we think about African textiles, in older terms, the African textiles was positioned as dress and body adornment. However, over the more recent years, that terminology has been replaced, and I think rightfully so, with this notion of African fashion, right? It's probably better and more accurate not to just call this stuff African cloth and textiles and dress and body adornment, but really African fashion. And when we start to look at it more broadly as fashion, we start to realize how crucial fashion is across the continent, whether it's active in trade, in the marketplace, in tourism, or in Cameroon, as you see down here, if you follow my cursor, as a sort of political type of cloth that would be worn during political rallies and speeches, or if you follow my cursor here, as a divine symbol of kingship among the Yoruba kingdom in southwest Nigeria, with this wonderful beaded crown. Or if you have this idea in terms of African fashion being performed through rituals and ceremonies and festivals with this wonderful Kuba woman's wrap textile that's made of raffia in the back. Or you have this beautiful ensemble here from Ethiopia in terms of a festive garment. Textiles is truly diverse. And so let's try to understand the global, the political, the economic, the performative elements with the examples that I want to show you that go beyond the examples exhibited just in the exhibition, although I'll return to some of those as well. So first and foremost, let's jump to South Africa as a quick example. African fashion is not only probably one of the most important art forms across the continent, but African fashion truly, organically, innately is a part of daily life. African fashion is not just a notion of let's dress to impress. There are serious, deep political reasons and motivations behind dress and fashion across the continent. And so I take you to South Africa and a really important historic moment, a difficult historic moment, the South African apartheid, which some might be unfamiliar with, but truly a moment that needs reflection. And so the apartheid in South Africa was from 1948 to 1944. And this is where we had legal racism. This is where we had segregation. This is where we had a national party led by the Afrikaner, white-led national political party that enforced a legal segregation. And so what we're looking at here is an ideology that reinforced the classifications of races, where you have ideas of white, black, colored, and then Indian. And anybody non-white was relegated, exploited, and oppressed in this political system. And there's a typo there. It's 1948 to 1994. So my apologies for that. And so what we have here is some 3.5 million non-whites were removed from homes, were relocated, were treated not even as second-class citizens, and highly oppressed. And it's in these difficult moments where you have heroes rise. And that's where you have individuals like Nelson Mandela. And why I'm going into this in this particular case is just a really powerful example of how fashion played within this difficult moment. And here you have Nelson Mandela using fashion and dress in a political way to navigate this difficult circumstance of the apartheid government, where if you follow my cursor in the early 30s and 40s as an activist, Nelson Mandela was dressing as a lawyer, was using sort of the Western suit and tie. But as he is progressing in terms of his freedom fighting during the apartheid, is he's starting to use Hosa dress in the 50s and 60s and 70s to bring about the pride that he has in South African cultural heritage that is heavily oppressed at this time. And then, of course, he became president. And overthrew the apartheid government and became the first president. And this is where we have the wonderful Madiba shirt that he's very well known for wearing during his presidency and then after. And so we really start to understand how important fashion is in this particular context. And the Madiba shirt was originally a fish shirt, sort of silk painted fish motifed shirt that was handed to him and his bodyguards during 1994 that he wore and embraced. And this became sort of an icon of overturning the apartheid. And it's really fascinating that designers like Armani approached him Western large-scale designers like Armani approached him to sort of brand this, and he said no, and he continued to work with South African designers to create these shirts. And here's a quote that really helps us understand why he's wearing this shirt, which is inspired not only by South African culture, but Indonesian batik and other ideas across Southern and Eastern Africa. And I quote him, "I wear these shirts to represent my people and their struggle, and to represent the beautiful, diverse cultures and traditions of Africa," end quote. And so as another example, we will turn to Nigeria, Calabar, where I have done work since 2008, and my work here is ongoing. And here we have a performative sort of photograph of a ceremony where we have masquerades, dancers, drummers, and singers in this street performance. And this is partly connected to the Efik culture in Southeast Nigeria, and this is known as the Ekpe Secret Society, which is a tremendously important historic institution that once was in charge of government and leadership, and today is representing the people, and it's often understood as a local form of support and cultural system in many ways. It's a religious institution, it's a political institution, it's a cultural institution. And what I want to address here is the beautiful use of fashion and dress and textiles in this moment frozen in time. And if you follow underneath the umbrella, you see an individual here with a top hat. And let's take a closer look at what he's wearing. And these are two different versions. These are the celebrants of this street performance of this ceremony, and they are being initiated into the rank of chief of this prestigious Ekpe society. And so their dress must separate them from the rest. And as you see here, they are dressed in an English top hat, a type of velvet vest with beadwork embroidery and tassels, a wrapper tied around their waist. They have a long metal ceremonial staff. And what's interesting, if we had more time, that these garments that they're wearing, this fashion, is indicative of a global history that the Ekpe society was definitely part of. And this dress indicates the exchange between Southeast Nigeria and Europe, particularly Victorian styles of dress. And if you look inside of those top hats, it says "Made in England." And so there is most definitely a global influence playing in the type of celebrant garments and fashion that are being worn. If you even look further, those of you that are hockey fans, if you can look closely and follow the cursor, there is what appears to be the Florida Panther. I think it's their older logo that has been reinterpreted for this particular type of dress ensemble to enhance the quality and beauty of the fashion. And of course, the idea of the Panther here would have deep cultural significance. If we go further, other chiefs are also fantastically dressed in long shirts, in silk scarves, in wrappers. And if we look at the origin of these materials, a lot of these materials are actually not from Nigeria, but are imported in to enhance sort of the global appeal and fashion of the event, and certainly of the ensembles that they are featuring. If we go back to this performance here, if you follow my cursor, we have a masquerade made of cloth. And this is known as the Ekpe Idem Ebonko masquerade. And in this particular example, here are some others that I have captured over the years and have helped to commission for various museums. This also is a masquerade that you might not suspect to see in West Africa, where it is completely made of imported materials and cloth, mostly from Asia and India. And the idea is that the use of this cloth is meant to reflect the history of global exchange and the marketplace of the Ekpe society as it's sort of communicated through these very luxurious foreign imported materials. And so you can start to see how various elements from inside and outside, well beyond the continent, are shaping fashion and dress, masquerade ensembles, and the like. A truly global enterprise here as we're looking at in terms of these examples of dress. And so the last one that I want to look at in about the 2.5 minutes that I have left is an example from Mali in the area of Bamako and the Bamana culture and their wonderful Bogolon Fini mudcloth handmade textile. And because I do not have time, here's a wonderful book that if you're interested in understanding the female aspect, the feminine aspect, because this is truly a textile made and owned by women, The Silence of Women, Bamana Mudcloth, a book by Sarah Brett Smith, is a wonderful resource to really understand that further. And what we are seeing here is a cloth tied to womanhood that was once handmade and still is. And what we are looking at in terms of, again, the ways in which textiles and fashion are influenced from larger forces at play and change over time and space. In the 1970s, we saw Bogolon Fini turn into this genre known as Bogolon. And here's another wonderful book if you're interested in learning more, Bogolon, Shaping Culture Through Cloth in Contemporary Mali, by Victoria Rovine. And this idea is taken from her wonderful research where in the 1970s, because of the urban quality of the city of Bamako, Bogolon Fini started to morph into what was known now as Bogolon, where we have tourist examples made, we have fine art paintings being created, and we also have local forms of fashion cut into men's and women's types of garments and clothing, where now Bogolon has become a symbol of cultural heritage for not only the Bamana, but of course, for Mali in general. And with that, I'm setting up the next speaker. Because these cloths are not only fantastic and beautiful, they have also inspired Western fashion. And so here we have difficult questions that now lead us to appropriations by major companies and designers like Urban Outfitters, Duar, Stella McCartney, and many, many others, where they are making use of African ideas and branding them as exotic and tribal and not really necessarily giving credit. And so this sets up the complicated issue of African textiles and fashion. And we start to talk about Western fashion and the idea of Western appropriation. And with that, I will stop and hand it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Dr. Fenton. Thank you for sharing all the significant textile and fashion in different African communities, and they are really a heritage for we to learn about. And I encourage everyone to go to your exhibition to check out all the awesome artifacts from African textiles. So today I'm sharing some examples from the fashion industry, example from the fashion one way. There is always a discussion about cultural appropriation and appreciation. And among here, there is some examples in an article from the Women's Wear Daily. They share about the controversy between the designer and like the inspiration and the background using throughout the cultural elements. Here you can see some example. First of all is the Dolce & Gabbana Spring 2013 one-way inspired by the Moorish head ceramics, and also some African tribal inspired sealed bouquet couture bride and ensemble by Jean-Paul Gaultier in spring 2005. So in Donna Karen's spring 2012 one-way show, there's some textiles inspired by Haitian artist Philip's daughter. Also, there is some Asian inspired designs from an Indian sari-inspired ensemble from John Galliano in 2003 in Paris, and particularly there is also Chinese inspired iconical um, garment by Dries van Noorend in fall 2012. So in the fashion industry, numerous Western fashion brands and designers have been criticized for committing acts of cultural appropriation at the last 2 decades, prompting them to issue public explanation, apologize, and discontinuous of the controversial fashion products. While cultural appropriation controversy exists continuously and frequently among the contemporary fashion industry, what is cultural appropriation? What is the definition about it? This term, cultural appropriation, it's officially recognized since 2018 by the Oxford English Dictionary. The term cultural appropriation defined as an adoption of language, behavior, clothing, or traditions from a minority culture or social group by a dominant culture. It is a manner that's exploitative, disrespectful, and stereotypical, and unauthorized, which is without permission adoption of cultural expression, artifacts, traditional knowledge, and intellectual property from other communities. When cultural artifacts and intellectual property are taken from their original contents, disregarded and repurposed for other use, cultural appropriation occurred. That means cultural appropriation raised when special cultural values, beliefs, and traditions are offense, challenged, or misused. For cultural appropriation, it is really a hot topic in the fashion field in the past few years, more specifically defined as deliberate borrowing and use of cultural elements by the fashion industry for the benefit of the fashion brands it owns or the designer to attract more customer and get more money benefits from their customer. It is criticized as stealing, borrowing, and profiting from cultural heritage from underprivileged community without acknowledgement or compensation. Um, Cultural appropriation is rooted in an unjust practice categorized by power imbalance, silencing, exploitation, and misinterpretation within the fashion industry's predetermined power structure and value. These unjust practices have led to immorality, objectification, and oppression of marginalized cultural groups by dominant powers. In the latest publication book, Cultural Appropriation in Fashion and Entertainment from Kawamura and Dillon, they summarize several conceptual typologies of cultural appropriation in fashion, which are the reinforcement of political racism, stereotype, and historical oppression, the misuse of indigenous cultural tradition, textile motif, and ensemble techniques, the exploitation of economically challenged group through class appreciation. So there's a lot of issue come out with when cultural appropriation occurred. There is negative impact for the marginalized cultural groups in various problematic ways, especially they stereotype a culture and display the culture in a negative light. There is a transformation and losing the culture's object's original meaning. It fails to acknowledge the cultural significance and compensate to the original cultural groups. Cultural appropriation is a continuous issue in the fashion industry throughout the history back to Orientalism, chinos wear, and Japanism in the 18th and 19th century Europe. As a turning point, Karamura and De Jong, they point that the widespread of using social media in the last decade empowered the public to act as watchdog. They monitor instances of cultural appropriation throughout the social medias and throughout the internet. Also, at that time, in the meantime, the marginalized group export to stereotypes and offense through social media. They are no longer remaining silent. They are actively criticizing instances of cultural appropriation. As an Asian scholar, my research in cultural appropriation focused on Chinese and Japanese culture. Here are some examples I would like to share about the cultural appropriation controversy. First of all, is the Les Sinoir collection launched by the designer Yves Saint Laurent in 1977 as a suggestion of a form of imitation. It raised question about the portrait of Oriental style as a potential constituting patriotism, which is fulfilling the concept as deliberating borrowing and use of cultural element in the fashion industry with a fail to compensate to the original cultural group. Moreover, the brand's fragrance Opium, launched in the same year, aiming to evoke the sophistication and exoticism of the Orient and Imperial China. However, the use of this Chinese-inspired name and marketing strategy sparked controversy due to its association with the destructive history of the Chinese Opium War and the drug itself, which is a reinforcement and negative light on the Chinese culture and historical. More examples of the cultural appropriation based on Chinese and Japanese culture are from many luxury brands such as Dolce & Gabbana's using of chopsticks, misunderstanding the cultures of chopstick in their advertisement. John Galliano's inspiration from geyser, which give a sexual appeal on the kimono styles. Some others image from the advertisement in Christian Dior, showing the Chinese women's spooky face and greasy hair. Other advertisements from Dolce & Gabbana, they are highlighting the distance between the privilege of the brand and the local people in China. At the bottom lower picture, that is like from Burberry, where they are promoting their new collection for the Chinese New Year. However, the color, the image, the portrait of the models in this style give like a backlash, showing that they are not really understanding the culture and the meaning behind the Chinese New Year. In the fashion industry, there is always a strong argument between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. While John Galliano's geyser-inspired design was accused as cultural appropriation, in a recent discussion with a Japanese cultural scholar from the Metropolitan Museums, she shared that his design are actually a hybrid style, which means the clothing combining East and West cultural elements. Also, she mentioned that the intention and presentation format should be also considered before we accuse that as a cultural appropriation, such as the theme of Madame Butterfly from John Galliano's runway show, and also Tom Brown's 2015 menswear with the kimonos silhouette, the Japanese textile and motif, and associate to present with Japanese tatami mats and kimono textile as the background to appreciate the culture itself. In contrast to this critical issue, the concept of cultural appreciation is widely embraced in the industry. Cultural appreciation demonstrates through a conscientious attitude and practice of honoring and respecting the culture and its people. There are three main elements from cultural appropriation discourse which focus on the moral interpretation, the prohibition of power imbalance between cultural groups, and the embracement of cultural differences and diversity. Cultural appreciation involves respectful and accurately represent portrait of inspiration from a given culture, which is the key for adopting a cultural element in a fashion design. In a recent conversation with a Chinese-based cultural scholar, he mentioned with us that not knowing something doesn't make you ignorant, but is that ignorant people think they know all. So from that phase, we actually knowing with the advanced information technology nowadays, we should be well using that as a source to learn and research more about cultural information before we should using them. To achieve cultural appreciation, Butter recommends several concepts we can follow, which is learning intentionally and actively explore the cultural meaning and significance for a deeper learning, deeper understanding, and successful learning experience from the museum and the people, which are the cultural community that we are borrowing or like adopting their cultural element, who are native to particular culture. It will be a beginning of self-awareness regarding fashion choice in the industry. This self-awareness allows an engagement in mindful critical thinking and acknowledging that culture are not just repeating in history, but it is an ongoing value and belief within specific community. This recommendation match with museums' mission because the ultimate goal is imposing that the present generation may use and adopt the cultural property only to the point when future generation will not be harmed in their capability of understanding and living their multiple meaning and value. That's always student asking, oh, I'm not using this cultural element because I'm worrying about cultural appropriation. If I'm using this motif, will that be a cultural appropriation accused? So it is an answer for that. When you are using that cultural element, you have to make sure the future generation will not be losing that particular meaning and value from that particular cultures. Matching with the museum's mission as a cultural institute for cultural sustainability, the idea of cultural appreciation ensure the preservation of cultural resources and the transferring of cultural knowledge to the next generation. In a recent research, we are using the object-based learning through the university museum cultural objects. We are sharing different kind of fashion, costume, tech, and textile with historical textile learners in the fashion program at Kent State University. We have a survey with them to knowing how the object-based a learning approach through the university museums artifacts can help them learning about cultures. In that survey, here is the results. That's that they mentioned that the cultural objects really enhance their knowledge of the object's cultural significance and support recognition of global cultures. And 70% of them thinking that will establish and reinforce their cultural awareness, which is one of the important starting point for cultural appreciation. About 70% think that they increase their awareness in cultural-based research for future research and curiosity about different kind of global culture. From these cultural objects in the university museum, they find their interest that draw their curiosity, which is they want to learn more about the evolution of the culture and itself. They want to, through these objects, they want to learn more about the cultural significance, the meaning of the motif, how to wear that particular cultural objects, especially for costume, and also the interrelationship between culture. As Dr. Fenton mentioned, the culture emphasizing between different country and communities. So in within textile and fashion, we can see all different kind of relationship between cultures. To further and support fashion students to learn through cultural objects, we actually have some cultural objects shared with students in class, bringing from the university museum, which we find it's very successful and helpful for students to learn through engaging with the objects. When they touch, feel, the sensation is essential for them to learn about a culture. And also, physically learning is what we think is not enough. We think we should also enhance another level of supporting fashion students in cultural learning through a digital platform. So we also have putting all our curated cultural objects into a digital platform named History Pin, which allow the platform to show all details of the image, of the cultural object image, with description, with language to further research, and also with a map to highlighting where it is. So the attaching for with a map is very helpful for students knowing where the cultural object is located nowadays. To continue to have learning from university museum in our fashion program in the textile course, we are continue to collaborate with the arts museums to learn from the objects we have, which is very important for textile learning and fashion students to learn from a global textiles about the background meaning to really feel the objects when they are learning fashions. So here are what I have. I hope I didn't overrun a lot of the time. Thank you for having me to share my research and the learning from the university museums.
Thank you both. We do have some questions, so I think probably either of you are equipped to answer most of them. But I will start. Let's see. Hang on, let me get to my right question. This question comes from Carrie, and she asks if she really enjoys the food, the art, the music, etc., what have you, of another culture and choose to like regularly have it in her life. Does that qualify as cultural appropriation? I suspect that that's she's doing that more in honor of rather than appropriating. But can you sort of expand and elaborate on that?
I'll jump in there. I'd like to hear what Elaine has to say in connection to this as well. But I don't think so. Yeah, I think that the division, the line in the sand, is drawn when you are financially career-wise, professionally gaining from said influences, right? If you are interested in Indian or African cuisine, well, so be it. It's great food, right? I see no problem with that. But if you then become a chef and you're not from that culture, and you start to then create sort of this line of food or offerings or restaurants, and you are using other cultures, right? Again, that might be problematic, right? What I often try to talk to my students and teach is there are wrong ways of doing this and there are better ways of doing it, right? But in those particular instances, I really don't think that music, I mean, we're enjoying other culture, I think, as human beings. That's a part of this global world in which we live, and I applaud you for that. But it's when we start to gain in different ways, specifically financially, because places like Africa, for example, have long been exploited, have long been taken advantage of through colonization, through taking of resources. Culture is another resource. There's no problem with enjoying it, but there is a line. And once you cross that line, let's say as an artist or designer, there are wrong ways to use a culture that is not yours in your designs or artistic work. And there are better, more correct, ethical ways. And that's what we want to try to get towards. Not to intimidate you from not being inspired by cultures beyond your own, but understanding there's a responsibility that comes with that.
Elaine, did you have something to add? I know that this is sort of your lane for sure.
Thank you. I really agree with Dr. Fenton's opinions. I think like financially is one concern if that is like you gain some financial benefit from that culture that is kind of like a cultural appropriation way. And then the borderline is another thing we don't want to cross. But I also want to share that many people really scared to where looking for that line where the boundary where how the boundary is so they might be having problem in getting to know if they will be accused as cultural appropriation. But I want to also share like when you are embracing a culture, when you are learning, continue learning about that particular culture, and also like reach out to that particular culture local people to learn more about the background meaning, collaborating with them, that will be a more positive way for you to when you embrace a culture. Also, as I mentioned, there's always like a hybrid way of this in design and arts. While you are embrace that culture, you can also combine, merge your own opinion into that culture. That is your design and your opinion. It is always the intention while you are taking advantage from that culture for financial reason. But like merging, like combining your own opinion, that will not be accused, that should not be accused as cultural appropriation, but like a change or like merge and merging of cultures.
Excellent. I think that's a great answer. That certainly made it a little more clear for me. Jordan, I'm gonna throw one of your slides back up here. This question comes from Jennifer. And she's asking a question about the masquerade images that you shared. I believe it's one of these. And she asks, what's on the bottom of their cuff? Are those actual shoes, or are those like cuffs from the actual ensemble?
The bottom portion, what is that material?
Yeah, those aren't shoe. Those are
No,
actual.
yeah, oh, yes. Yeah. So masqueraders in this area of the world, as well as many in Africa, actually are barefoot, right? So they're barefoot, and what you're seeing there is the bottom part of the ensemble where they're like tufts. They are leg tufts. And the idea here is that it's an inner soft material that's wrapped with sequin sample cloth, as it's called, and then there is yarn trimming that has been woven and then stitched onto the top, right? So these are your sort of, they call it wool, but these are essentially yarn that you can buy at Joann Fabrics in many ways, right? A global material. And then you have bells and other sequins that are often attached to it. But generally speaking, as you take a step back, this will make more sense, where the masquerades of Ekpe have a underneath tight-fitting garment. They have a long sort of pointed headdress. And then you have a large chest mane. You have arm tufts and leg tufts. The idea is that the symbolism, and this is more of a symbol, is taken as a sort of a leopard or lion with a large chest mane. So there's a metaphor in connection to this idea of, the cat, king of the jungle, lion, leopard, panther kind of idea here. And so that's kind of the iconography, right? The art history word that means picture writing that's going on here. And that helps to explain those leg tufts are meant to be sort of the hair on the legs of the lion.
That's actually really super interesting. I'm glad that question came up. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking that. In fact, I have another question from Jennifer. She was referencing what you said about the jaguars sort of infusion into that one ensemble. I believe maybe this was the image here,
Mm-hmm.
I think. She asked how, because that's an imported textile not from Africa and it's complementing their formal dress, what's the distinction between that and cultural appropriation sort of? Is that, can you explain that?
Yeah. So that is not like a pre-made motif. If we were to look closer, this is a hand-made velvet black vest. And over top of that velvet vest, you have ideas of cheetah print that is embroidered onto it. And then over top of that is you have a handmade beadwork embroidery sort of panther jaguar motif in many ways, right? And so it's not as if it's a copy and paste, but it is taken, I think, when I look at it from a sports team concept. So, does that apply to ideas, constructs of cultural appropriation? I think that's a really interesting question in many ways, and I think it's very layered. In some ways, perhaps. In some ways, perhaps not. But again, these are handmade things, not to sidestep the question. It's not an existing logo. It's sort of created from something that they saw. And again, the idea of the jaguar, the panther, the lion, the leopard is to attach on this animal type of symbolism. And I guess I would throw that to the specialist, Elaine. What are your thoughts about that? Because that's a really interesting question.
I don't see any cultural appropriation in this example. I will think like for cultural appropriation, there is always an imbalance of power showing. So for this community, they are well using the material, and then they are putting their own motif. The motif have their own meaning, representing their own community. I really don't see any cultural appropriation here. And if you are also mentioning the bob hats, which is from England, as Dr. Fenton, which is made in England, while they are like having it as an ensemble, like as a whole image. I feel that is also like like interchange and intercommunication of culture instead of cultural appropriation, because they are not using that for getting benefit their community, and that is also considered without any imbalance of power. So that's why I feel that I don't see any of cultural appropriation from this example.
Yeah,
I think that was actually really helpful.
if I can, and I love that, right, Elaine? I think that you really nailed that in many ways. And another element here, while that might be kind of an image derived from a sport team, an element that I haven't explained is that there is some influence back and forth between Europe and England, right?
Mhm.
And there is an attempt, because of course this was an English colony, there was trade well before colonialism, that some might argue, and this is a longer, more difficult argument, but the notion of the because this is a regal leadership institution, and lions are not indigenous to this part of Africa. That might seem shocking to folks, but they're absolutely not. They're very far, far in east southern area of Africa. So some have argued that actually their connection of lion and regalness comes from a European concept of the regal and connections with the lion. So in many ways, that's kind of like a nod to an influence that they were inspired by. And so again, I think that connects to what Elaine was saying and giving a little bit more context to this, more of a sort of a respectful nod, an interchange and cross-cultural exchange rather than a power dynamic.
I really like that, a respectful nod. I feel like that is very much in keeping with the idea of cultural appreciation. A way to sort of honor and showcase another culture that you can sort of, I really like that. That's actually thank you, Jennifer, for asking that question also. It's good. Let's see. I have got, well, Diane says this is a great presentation. She has learned so much. So we have at least one super fan for sure. Lee, he actually has an interesting question here. He said he imagines that most people sort of don't know much about various specific cultural designs. So when it comes to looking at fashion brands, and I know you mentioned a number of sort of like flagship designers, how do you sort of spot, how does the average person sort of spot what might be considered cultural appropriation? Like what elements do we look for? And Elaine, I know you mentioned sort of that database that you called it pin something. Maybe you could speak to how available that is as well.
So yes, I think we like as a fashion learner, and also we all keep learning every day. The great resources we have is from museums. They have a lot of cultural.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Uh-oh, we lost Elaine
oh
for a
no.
second. We'll give her a few minutes, see if she can make it back. Oh, wait, there she is.
Sorry,
A dramatic way to answer a
Yeah.
question.
sorry about that. The internet suddenly gone. What I just mentioned. So I know, like as a fashion student, we are not we are still learning what is appropriate or how to knowing what is appreciate and appropriate. And among all the fashion we see on the one way, which one have that particular culture? We don't know. We don't know. But we should not only see the image present from like social media. We have different uh, celebrities. They post a one-way show, and then there is a lot of fashion magazine. They post the image. As a fashion student, I would recommend that not only on focus on the image, but the description from the designers, from the brand's description. What is the presentation they are like the aim, the goal, the theme they are using. Those are very important for us to look at what they have been inspired. That will be also include as the first slide I have when designers are showing that they have like the sari inspired silhouette. That's actually shared by the designer. He want to embrace the silhouette when he what he like, and then what he want to put the silhouette, the sari in silhouette into his design. So that is from the intention of the designer, and not you can only see from the image. So I will really recommend you go back to more deeply into what their intention, the theme of the show, the fashion show, theme of that season that the brand presented. That is something we can learn more from that. If you want to learn more, as I mentioned about cultures, we are keep learning cultures. Anytime when you visit museums, that's all different historical and cultural pieces you can look at. You will gradually increase your cultural knowledge through these objects, not only from textile, but sometimes from paintings. We can see some human figure wearing historical and cultural costume. That way, you can learn while at that period of time, like that cultural people, like cultural group, they are wearing that particular type of costume and textile. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that was covered really well. Just to sort of use different phrasing, right? Use critical thinking, use research, educate yourself. We shouldn't consume blindly, right? We should read. There are sources. There are individuals that you can talk to. There's ways to avoid this, and in many ways, kind of boycott such cases. And again, right, at college, that's what we're about: critical thinking and understanding how to use research. And don't just read an Amazon review, and that's not research, right? Go a little deeper and inform yourself, right? Be an informed consumer.
Yeah, and I feel like if there's any question, in your mind, that's worth looking into, because I think that if you're sort of left questioning, then perhaps it warrants taking a next step to sort of see if in fact that might be offensive or whatnot. Well, thank you so much. We actually filled up the entire hour. That's so exciting. I think I learned a lot of new stuff. I think our viewers did as well. I got some really good comments. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing this really interesting topic with us. I mean, I know it's a global world, but I think it's very important to continue to sort of use those critical thinking skills and appreciate rather than appropriate. So thank you very much. You can visit the featured exhibition, not expedition, Art and Exchange African Textiles in the Global Marketplace, on display now at the Richard and Carole Cox Art Museum, and you can see that through June 7th. Also, a reminder, if you're interested in viewing a recording of this webinar, you can do so later today at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. Thank you all for joining us, and love and honor to you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.